Hello, everybody. Welcome to our broadcast today. I'm Myckelle Williams, and I'm going to be your host of the XYZ Connection podcast. Psychology Today did a report, and it said that half of adults have endured a mental health issue in their life. Mental health issues can result in shame. It can result in codependency. It can result in alcohol abuse and many other things that affect the home and the family. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. Today is show 2 of the XYZ Connection. We're going to be talking about love and mental health. How does mental health affect the home and the family? We saw Kanye West experience this and his family and watched how they were affected by his radical behavior. And so I wanted to just kind of touch on that. We're not necessarily going to talk about them per se, but I wanted to talk about how mental health affects the family structure and the family unit. What do you do? What are the red flags? What are some of the stigmas attached to mental health? What is the correlation between suicide and mental health? And what are the different types of mental health issues? We have a therapist on today, and she's going to be answering some of our questions. And we also have some amazing guests who have either endured mental health issues themselves or have close family members who are enduring mental health issues as we speak. So stay tuned, because this is going to be an amazing show. We're going to get into that brain and learn more about mental health, love, and relationships. So let's connect.
You are now tuned into the XYZ Connection, redefining the generational gap, hosted by Myckelle Williams, bringing you critical conversations impacting generations. Join us for real, raw, and relevant dialogue from a multi-generational perspective. Let's connect in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, this is Myckelle Williams, and I am your host of the XYZ Connection. We are bridging the communication gap between generations by giving insight into the collective viewpoints of Generation XYZ. I am excited about today's topic. We're going to be talking about love and mental health. You guys have been here for the relationship series, and this is the second show in the relationship series. So we're going to have some awesome guests. We're going to have a therapist, a sex therapist, actually. So that's even a whole nother show. And we're going to have some awesome people who know a little bit about mental health. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce right now our first guest. Hey, Mr. Adrian. He is from Generation X. How are you doing, Adrian?
Wonderful. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
I am glad to have you as well. Adrian is a 46-year-old husband and father of 5, and he has 2 grandsons. He's a blended family. This is his second and final marriage, he says. So that's awesome. He is Puerto Rican. And what is that other word, Adrian?
Chamorro.
Chamorro. Tell me, what is that?
So my mom's from Guam. It's an island in the South Pacific. So it's probably like 1,000 miles from Hawaii, but it's out in that direction.
Thank you for being here, Adrian. All right. So we have here our next guest, Miss Charity Danker. Welcome, Charity. I'm really excited to have you, because you have some stuff going on here that's going to be really interesting. Charity is a licensed mental health therapist and certified sex therapist. She's also a certified orgasmic meditation trainer. That's a mouthful right there. And coach. She owns Evanescence Counseling and Desire OKC Sexual Health and Wellness Center. Her primary work is with couples and individuals around the topic of sex and relationships. So yay, welcome. So glad to have you here. Yeah.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about what is orgasmic. And I think that's something I've never heard of before, an orgasmic meditation trainer.
Oh, well, orgasmic meditation is a philosophy and a practice. It's a partnered practice where one person is stroking the other person's clitoris or penis, either way, for the purpose of meditation. And
wow.
I could go more into it, but it's like a 3-hour explanation. So,
and we would probably have to have a disclaimer that before we even get into that.
Well, that depends on what words I choose to use, but yeah.
Well, awesome. Welcome. And I really appreciate having you here, Charity. It's good to have you. And our third guest, we got Jeremy from the Generation Z. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hi, Ms. Williams.
Jeremy Bean. He is born and raised in Tennessee. He has always been involved with his community. He leads youth and works with nonprofits. So that's awesome. He attends Middle Tennessee State University and is pursuing a master's degree in child education. Welcome, Jeremy. Tell us a little bit more about what you do with children.
So I work with two nonprofit organizations, one called Love Learning Music, which bridges the gap for musical therapy for inner city kids. And then I also lead at a youth organization called Young Life, which is just ministry for children.
Wow, that is awesome. That's awesome. Well, welcome everybody to the XYZ Connection. I'm sure you guys we've already talked about how this works. So what we're going to do is just discuss topics from a generational perspective. Each one of you represent X, Y, and Z generation, and we want to hear your take on how you feel. Today, we're going to be talking about mental health. Kanye West was recently in the media. And it kind of, we're not going to really get into them particularly as a couple because people have already been going on and on about them in the media, but we are going to kind of get into the doors that opened as far as mental health, because I feel like a lot of that behavior that he brought out to the forefront is something that is being discussed. You know, he ran for president, he did this, that, and the other. And so it's almost like it opened that door of communication as people started talking about, well, what is mental illness and how do we deal with it and how do we treat it? So I kind of want to start with Charity because she is the professional here. She's the doctor. And I wanted to ask her really quick, what is mental health when we get to talking about mental health and relationships?
Well, mental health is referring to the condition that regards your psychological and emotional well-being. And so a lot of people will suffer with anxiety or depression. Those are considered mental health illnesses. And those are really common. But then there's also larger mental health issues like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. So mental health can be a chemical imbalance in the brain. It can also be caused from hormonal imbalances in the body. And sometimes it is a result of a person's life or situation.
Now, I want to ask you this because this is something I read and I talked about a little bit in the intro. Half of all adults will be diagnosed with a mental illness in their lifetime. Do you think that sounds pretty accurate compared to some of the stuff you've researched?
Yes, maybe. I'm surprised it's not higher, but yes.
Really? Okay.
I mean, if you include, if you're including anxiety, people that struggle with anxiety or depression or sleeping defects that affect their mood, sleeping disorders can be under mental health. Bereavement and grief is considered mental health issues at times, depending on how heavy it affects somebody and how long that they are going through that grief and going through that bereavement. If it causes, basically, if it is causing them to not be able to function to their normal level of functioning in society, in their work, with their family, if it's causing them major dysfunction.
And I think that's interesting too, the point that you said about depression and anxiety being a mental health illness problem, because most people think, hey, I'm just depressed, I'm going through a hard time. But that is actually technically part of a mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised about that because I think a lot of people, you've grown up with people who maybe in your family have struggled with depression. And even now, I've heard they're adding alcoholism in there.
Substance abuse and alcoholism have been considered part of the mental health, or what we call the DSM. It's our diagnostic book. They've been in there for several years now.
Okay, wow. All right, so we're going to get into mental health and relationships, but I wanted to hear from the gentleman as well. What your experience, Adrian, with mental health?
I have a couple of experiences. One was a former spouse that has bipolar disorder, and another is my father, who's paranoid schizophrenic, and he actually lives with us. So that's pretty hard to deal with a lot of times. You know, it has its times when he goes through certain issues or circumstances that it's weighing on the household. You know, when he does go through it, and so those are the two instances that I have to share.
So you said your father-in-law right now is going.
No, my father.
Your father,
Yeah,
okay, and he's living in the home with you. How does that affect the dynamic of your home?
Oh, it daily, all day, every day. It definitely affects it. I guess I didn't know the magnitude of how it would affect our household until he was actually living with us, and just, you know, the constant appointments that he has to go to, and I have to kind of keep up on. So it's a lot of work. And then just when he does go through, I call them episodes. You know, it can be him knocking on my door 3 a.m. and, you know, saying there's ghosts in his room or something. It's just, so it definitely affects the household, everyone in it.
And then you're recently married, not that long. So how has your wife been? Because I know that's your father. And how has your wife been helping you, or has she had issues with it, or have you guys had discussions where maybe it's affected her, or what are those talks like?
I think it's all of the above, really. But I think she's been 100% supportive of me and steps in where I need help. You know, if it's setting his appointments or whatnot. And it definitely is weighing on our relationship sometimes. You know, it's so I can't say that it doesn't. It does cause issues sometimes, but we work through them, we talk through them, and we get up. You know, we get through it. So.
And then has this been something he struggled with all his life, or is this recent? Yeah. Oh, really?
Well, I think in his 20s, but I didn't grow up with my father, so we didn't establish a relationship really until probably my mid to late 20s, and that was just like once in a while we talk, you know. So now it's like we're getting to know each other. And
you jumped right in there.
Right. And we're dealing with everything. So it's
wow.
You know,
wow.
It's a burden, but it's also a blessing, I feel like, because I didn't grow up with my father.
So is that something that you struggled with? Maybe is there a facility that he could have gone to, and how did you make that decision not to send him away?
I guess I feel like there wasn't many options as far as, I didn't want to like just put him in a facility. I know a lot of his older sisters have passed away. And typically in the past, he's lived with them, you know, at some point or another, or on his own sometimes. But, you know, when speaking to his past psychologist, he told me it wasn't a good thing for him to live on his own. And I get that from seeing past incidences. You need someone that's going through paranoid schizophrenia. You need someone that's there, that's kind of monitoring them, making sure they're taking their meds, going to their appointments and whatnot. So.
And is that a genetic trait, schizophrenia, or is it something that you've worried about may affect you and your children?
I mean, from what I hear, it is genetic. It's and it is a worry that it could be passed on to my kids or grandkids or whatnot. But so far, I know typically they don't like to diagnose until people are in their, I believe, late teens to even up to early 30s or so. But yeah, I think he was diagnosed around his 20s.
I know that they have some sort of genetic testing for breast cancer, but are there genetic tests to determine whether mental illness can be inherited?
Not accurate ones, no.
Okay.
But mental health, things like schizophrenia very much can be passed down from generation to generation, or it can be created from like drug use, or brain traumas.
All right. And Mr. Jeremy, I want to ask you, because I know you said recently you've been talking to young people, and I know you've probably talked to them recently about mental health. What is your experience with mental health as it pertains to youth that you've worked with?
A lot of the mental health I see in my generation, and a lot of the cause of it is kind of just the social aspect of social media, always comparing yourself to what you see online, or, when you see another 20-year-old doing a lot better than you in life. My personal experience, I had depression in high school very bad after an injury where I saw that I thought, my life was kind of over and my career had just taken a whole different life change and switch. And I was, you know, just in a very terrible place for about 2.5 years. And I got with some people and got in a new community and just got back involved with youth and just with friends. And it kind of just changed the way I thought about things in my own mind and my own headspace. And that's what I kind of see with a lot of my students and a lot of my close friends, just like taking them out of a situation and placing them in a new one to give them a little bit more freedom and a little bit more life to their, life that they feel like they're so trapped in a box in.
So does the fact that you went through depression help you to be able to help others kind of get out of that space?
Definitely yes, but at the same time, sometimes no, because everyone goes through things differently. I've had a couple more other odd and traumatic instances with family and life. So it's, everyone's vastly different on how they accept things and how things are taken. But I try to be as open-minded as possible with my generation and with friends and family, just to try to be there and understand what they're going through.
Okay. Now, when you said you went to some people for help, was that a therapist, a center, a facility, or just friends?
None of the above. My biggest mentor in life was actually my youth leader. Mm-hmm. So he actually died due to cancer when I had just hit college, but he was there through all of it and just kind of walking with me and through me without life. And he was able to guide me in the right direction to kind of just pull me out of my sad and lonely box and self-pity party.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're okay and you're here with us today. So that's awesome. You have a great story to tell, and I'm sure you will influence others in that way as well. I want to ask Charity, is there a stigma attached to mental health?
I think it's both. I think it really depends on where you are. Also, there's cultural aspects that you have to consider. So different cultures, being Caucasian, I also was taught that mental health, my mother actually used to say that all therapists were quacks. And when I became a therapist, she said, I guess I'll just call you Daffy Duck because now you're a quack.
Oh, no.
She got over it eventually. But she had an experience with a mental health professional, and she didn't like it. And so then they must all be quacks, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's definitely some stigmas. I mean, people used to think that if you were going to a therapist or a psychiatrist, you must be crazy. Or if you had to go to a psychiatric hospital, then you were crazy. There was something wrong with you. We needed to exile you. I mean, people used to, 60 years ago, people were still being sterilized, like chemically. Men were castrated, but women, they would perform like hysterectomies on women so that they couldn't have children.
Sterilized, yeah.
Even only 60 years ago, that was still happening. Wow. Women were being put into hospitals because they were depressed, not suicidal, but just because they were depressed. Or people were locked up into mental hospitals because they were gay, or because they were transgender and we didn't have a word for it. People with schizophrenia, schizophrenia is one of the major mental health disorders where people, they do have erratic behaviors and what we would call crazy behaviors, but they are also completely misunderstood. And if you address them with love and compassion and you just kind of ride the ride with them, then then they can come back to reality faster sometimes. So yeah, mental health has a stigma. It always has. It still does. It is getting better. I think that media helps it be better. Now when you watch TV, you will see mental health being displayed on television. You see people where they'll have like a series of shows explaining that this person was suicidal and they sought out help or they didn't seek out help, right? So it's changing, but it is a slow process, as everything in America seems to be when we're trying to change people's minds and trying to change that stigma. But one person at a time, right?
That's true. One day, one person. So that's
Yeah.
good. So as far as it pertains to relationships, because today's topic is more about within the relationship, I've noticed that mental health is being discussed more as, people that you're involved with have it, and you're wondering, how do we navigate this? What are even the signs? Like, how do I know? Let's talk about depression, because that's a big one even with youth. That's a big one, no matter, especially with the pandemic going on. People are getting more depressed. They're having to be locked down. They're having major life shifts and changes. So when it comes to depression and or anxiety, what are some of the signs that a partner can look for that would tell them that this person may be suffering from one of those illnesses?
Okay. It does kind of depend a little bit if you're referring to a man or a woman or a child, because there are slight differences. For men, you typically will start seeing anger outburst, men and children. You will see more anger outburst, staying away from home, not coming home, not participating with family events, not participating, like if they normally would play football with the guys on Saturday and now they're not. Excessive, drinking, using drugs, those things are true for men and women. With the drinking and using drugs and isolating, pulling away from your friends and family. With women, a lot of times they can mask it longer because they're better at faking it. And men are really good at faking it too, because they can compartmentalize. But with men, you usually will see it in the anger. With women, you see it in their short fuse around their children, perhaps. Or they just won't smile. If it's somebody who's normally a smiling, happy, bubbly person, and day after day and week after week, you're seeing them and they're no longer smiling, like that's a good sign that they're depressed. But then actual clinically looking at it, sleeping, if there's a change in your sleeping habits, or like a major change in the eating habits, a significant change in their work performance or the way that they perform at school or in their daily routines. If you see any kind of erratic behavior, right? Like this person's just not acting like their normal self, right?
So, yeah,
they're
all
saying
character.
that they're okay. They're saying nothing's wrong, but they're just not acting like their normal self. That person oftentimes is dealing with a level of depression. There's different levels, but that person is most likely dealing with some level of depression. Or it might be severe anxiety, and anxiety and depression go really hand in hand. Having lots of worry, ruminating over things, bringing up the same topic over and over and over, and not really seeming to have like a resolution to it, not being able to problem solve it. When people get to a point in their life where they don't seem to be able to make a decision, but normally they could, that's a sign of depression, or it can also be a sign of anxiety. With children, you often see a lot of, with children and women, you often see a lot of crying, nail biting, pulling out hair. With children, nail biting and pulling out their hair. scratching themselves, inflicting harm on their own bodies, eating disorders. If they stop eating, or if they start like making themselves vomit, which is also what we call bulimia.
Wow. Okay. Well, these are some good signs. I mean, Adrian, how do you know an episode is coming on for your father?
It's kind of the same, a lot of the same descriptors that Charity described. I mean, for one, work was huge. She would call off work, and one day would turn into 2 or 3 days to a week to a month,
Was your wife?
Yes.
Okay.
Former wife.
Your former.
Yeah. I mean, that was one thing. And then it would just like snowball from there. And it can be, there were several things that would set her off, whether it was like seasonal depression or the passing of a close relative, the anniversary of that would set her off as well. And she would just be in a downward spiral from there. She would seclude herself, drinking and prescription drugs. The whole gamut. I mean, Charity described it well.
Isolation, not cleaning, not taking care of your own personal body. Like when people stop showering, or like if a woman typically wears makeup, I don't. But if a woman typically wears makeup and suddenly she's not, and she's not like repeatedly, like day after day, or she's not grooming herself like she normally does, she's not taking care of her nails, she's not taking care of her hair, she's not bathing on a regular basis. Men will do that too.
That's interesting. So, Jeremy, I know you deal with a lot of young people as well. Have you seen these signs, and have you, when you do see certain signs of depression or anxiety in one of your young people, how do you address it? Do you go to their parents? Do you talk to them personally? Do you have a meeting? I mean, how is that addressed?
It all depends on, the kid. They're also vastly different, which makes them beautiful individuals. But usually the first sign of my boys is anger. I mean, they're just quick triggers. They're all athletic. They're all tough, big talk. But that's the quickest thing, is like, just getting angry with your friends. Usually the next thing is isolation. And then the one where I start asking like, real questions to them personally is usually either after isolation, or just kind of skipping out on things. Then I ask them about their home life, ask them what's going on behind the scenes, try to collect as much information as I can, and then I'll go to my head leader, see what he wants to do from there. And then if he wants to go to the parents, great. If he wants to try to see where it goes, I mean, whatever works best for that specific kid. But sometimes their home life isn't the best. So, I mean, going to the
parent,
going to their parent, I mean, doesn't change anything. I had a kid who had an alcohol problem.
Yeah, sometimes the parent will instigate the situation, inflame it, and make it worse.
Yeah, I had a kid who had a bit of an alcohol problem. And so I was like, man, you're too young to be almost a raging alcoholic, man. Like, what's going on? And, he's calmed down now. He signed a scholarship to play soccer at a beautiful university. And, it's just, he needed to feel like he could be open with someone about any situation that wasn't, mom and dad.
Wow. I want to talk really quick because I've heard a lot of people lately use the word bipolar. And I almost feel like sometimes it's being thrown around very loosely.
It does.
If I'm happy now and I'm mad tonight, you're bipolar, or if I'm just mad and then you do something to make me angry, you're bipolar. So I just want to know, what is bipolar disorder? Because it may be a little different than depression and anxiety. And I hear it a lot. Even Kanye said he has it, but I want to know what it is.
That's a difficult one to answer, because there's like 15 different diagnoses for bipolar disorder.
Wow.
So it really depends on what kind of bipolar that you have. But typically, if somebody has bipolar disorder, we now actually we primarily call this major depressive disorder. So somebody that has bipolar disorder will have different periods where they go into a deep, deep, deep depression. This is the kind of depression that you might see on TV, on different movies or whatever, where the person like doesn't leave their bed. They cannot function at work. They can't hardly get out of bed, and if they do get out of bed, it is for the bare minimum. They're not eating, like I mean not eating for days, not eating. Typically, right? Unless you're like forcing it down them. If they are intaking something, they're most likely intaking alcohol or drugs, or both sometimes, which if they're on bipolar medication, they're not supposed to do any kind of drugs or alcohol because it messes with their medication and can be bad for their health. But so basically they'll go from, and this is a severe case. Not all cases are severe, and that's why there's like 15 different levels. But to kind of paint a picture, you'll have someone that goes from a severe depression that will last weeks, days to weeks. So a minimum of 3 days to like a maximum of a month or a couple of months even, it can. Okay. And then like that, they suddenly switch. They might wake up that day and be switched. They might just decide to get in their car. But they'll switch and suddenly they might be super happy or what we call elevated or euphoric. So it really depends on the level, but like somebody that has mania, they might hear music that's not playing. They might think that they're rich and just go spend a whole bunch of money. They might get on a plane and go to a different state. I mean, these are severe cases. Okay. The non-severe cases would be they got paid on Friday and they went and gambled the entire check and didn't see anything wrong with it, didn't even realize it was happening because they lose track of time. Losing track of time is a huge indicator that somebody has just went through a manic state, because you will be telling them all the things that they just did and they do not know what you're talking about.
Wow.
So a lot of times if they go into a manic state, they oftentimes will lose track of time. Thoughts of grandeur. So thoughts of grandeur is like Kanye West thinking that he can just be president all of a sudden.
I think that's interesting that depression and bipolarism sound so similar. So what's the big difference?
There's different levels of depression. So dysthymic depression is what I primarily work with. Okay. Dysthymic depression is depression that it could last more than 2 weeks, but typically it's seen as lasting less than 2 years. And that person is still functionable. So they have like this ongoing level of kind of sadness or feeling flat or having like a low affect. And that typically could last, if they're being diagnosed with this, is lasting 2 weeks to 2 years. But they don't have like necessarily the mania. They're not going to have like thoughts of grandeur. They're not going to hear music that's not actually playing. They're not going to think that they suddenly are a magician or that they suddenly know how to frame a house when they've never done it, or that they suddenly know how to play the stock market when they've never done it, or you know what I mean? They don't suddenly have a sense of knowledge that was never there or ability that was never there. And that is highly associated with the bipolar disorder, especially if they have mania. So dysthymic disorder is like, it's what we call your everyday depression now. It's what you see most often in somebody that is acting depressed or is being depressed. But sometimes they're actually just grieving. they're in bereavement.
I just find like it's mind blowing to me that there's so many different types of mental, issues. And I wasn't even aware. I haven't or never been aware of any family members that have gone through any sort of mental illness or even depression or anything like that. So it's beyond me. It's so surprising to know that it's so prevalent and that it's so ingrained right now in our community and in society. But with as it pertains to relationships, I want to know, how does it affect relationships when you are suffering from a mental illness and maybe you don't want to get help, or you think that you're okay and you don't want anybody getting in your business, or you don't want a therapist, or because I know with our community, like the African American community, we have a huge issue with getting help in any form. Like, we don't want to go to therapy. We don't want to talk to nobody. I can handle it. I'll hold it all inside. I'll deal with it.
Right.
So how do we
definitely.
How does that translate to relationships? Because you can't always do that and still keep a relationship going, can you?
I mean, I feel like personally over time, it breaks down the relationship. Just speaking from my own circumstance, after years, and I know it took my ex-wife it was several years before they actually diagnosed her, with bipolar disorder. But it was just years of going through the same cycle, right? And asking her to get help, and going with her to like a therapist, and her just not being completely honest with a therapist, so it's like, how can they help you if you're not being honest?
Yeah.
And then, me not knowing what the truth is as her spouse, right? It's like, is she lying? Is she just trying to hide it because she doesn't want to, say that this is really going on? Or so you don't really know what the truth is eventually, So it's hard. It starts breaking down the relationship.
And the relationship with even friends. Jeremy, have you seen, how that's affected young people and their friends and their family dynamic?
Definitely. If you're just not honest and open with people, you really can't get help from anything. Due to social media, people lack the basic skills of communication.
Jeremy, I promise you they already did before social media was ever there.
Well, now it's worse. And so like, you'll go to school and see your friends, and, even in college, like, I'll see people on campus and like, we have a class together and I will never hear from that person. Like, I sit right next to you.
Wow.
We're doing a project and it's like, where are you? It's like, it's like with social media and everything that's going on culturally, it's like there's no need to reach out anymore. Like, everyone's too scared to reach out to someone else. Everyone's too scared to have real and intimate conversations because, they might post this, or, it might get blown out of proportion, or I'll be the next one on TMZ for some random reason.
I'm gonna go viral for getting mad.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to go viral for the worst reason possible. And, it's really, communication is really tied to fear for a lot of the kids I talk to and a lot of my peers. It's just like, well, if I tell this person everything about me, they're just going to leave. That's not 100% true, but in most cases, sadly, I mean, when people find out that someone has something wrong emotionally, they just tend to clock out and act like they don't have the same thing going on.
Isn't that interesting? And I think that's part of the key of why people hide it, or they pretend that they're not suffering, because they don't want to alienate the people around them, or have people feel uncomfortable, or ask the wrong questions, or ask questions that they may not have answers to.
I just want to say, like, I understand that because of your generation, you see it as a social media problem. I will tell you, I'm 41 years old. And when I was in college, I experienced the same thing, and we didn't have cell phones. Wow. And we were just now getting internet. Well, we were just getting cell phones, but I wasn't rich enough to afford it. So, but that stigma of either not wanting to tell somebody that you're depressed, or not wanting to tell somebody that you're in a home where you're being abused, or you're in a home where your parents are drunk and you don't have food, and they don't come home or whatever it is, right? Like that you're dealing with something at home or something within yourself, like that has always been a problem in our society, in this country, and in many countries, right? Like, don't show your dirty laundry is what my mom used to say.
Or don't tell your right hand what your left hand is doing. A lot of people say that too.
Right.
You know, I grew up hearing that. You don't tell anybody what's going on in this house.
Oh yeah.
And that's a big thing in our community too. Why? Yeah. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the social media piece, because he was saying that it isolates people, which it does. And as with the name social media, you would think it would get people active and more closer and connected, but actually it does isolate. It does tend to isolate because you're on your phone. You could have a room full of people and you're focused on what you're doing. So it kind of isolates you in that way. But at the same time, it does open up the door to a lot of communication. A lot of things that we didn't talk about before, we're talking about now. So why is it that mental health is now being discussed in today's society and it wasn't discussed 30 years ago? I mean, you just thought you had the eccentric uncle who came to every picnic and, fell out. We didn't understand what it meant. We didn't know maybe he did have a mental illness. Why is it being discussed now?
I think it's kind of like what you guys all touched on. Like back 30 years ago, back in our generation, we were taught and told that you're to be seen and not heard, right? Mm-hmm. It's like you rarely talked about anything. You didn't talk about how you're feeling or what happened in school or anything like that. It's like, I don't know. I feel like parents back then kind of had their own thing going on, and they didn't really think about the kids and what they were thinking and what they were going through, and didn't know how to help them. So I just think it's not that they probably didn't care. It's probably they weren't equipped. They didn't have the tools because they kind of carried on the generational issues, from their past as well.
Like kids don't have feelings or opinions or backs.
I like how in today's time, people are more focusing on like child therapy and getting children the resources they need in order to succeed. But at the same time, in some ways, some people are developing narcissists as well in children because they're pouring so much or giving the children so much and spoiling them in such a different way than they used to, that they're producing kids who are like, me, everything's about me and mine. I want a phone. I want this. I mean, the kids having phones at 8 years old, it's just a different society. But I want to talk about suicide. What's the correlation between suicide and mental health?
What's the correlation? I would say it's a direct correlation. And I don't know anyone that's ever committed suicide that did not have mental health issues or a major drug and alcohol problem. And, sometimes that mental health issue is that they were severely abused. Either they haven't gotten old enough that they can get help for it on their own, or even with the help, they're still suffering.
And what about you, Jeremy? Do you think that there are a lot of young people right now who are, I know there's an increased risk of suicide right now amongst young people.
So not just an increased risk, but the numbers are way up now. Way up, like 20%.
Well, a friend of mine, her son took his life recently, and it was really tragic. She had no clue. He was 21, and this guy was everyone's counselor. He was everyone's friend. He was the one everybody went to talk to, and he encouraged everyone around him. No one knew he was silently suffering. So with suicide, how do you let's say you see someone going through a depression, how do you know that they're getting to that point that they may be willing to take their life?
There's never really just this true telltale sign. I remember I had a friend on the football team who my junior year, summer of senior year, we were all working at a coach's house, and we got the call that said he's gone, and that was it. And I remember him as a sweet, loving soul, but I also remember him just never really telling us what was really going on. And I think the best way to kind of prevent that is to just be a friend in a society that it's so easy to sit at home and stare at what the next 23-year-old is doing, how he's making so much money, how he's got, so many nice things. But I mean, that doesn't make him perfect mentally. It's the relationship that I always encourage my kids to do, is find people that you can really just pour out into, and they pour out in you, and just build that relationship, that trust, that closeness with, because I mean, whether you're poor or rich, that matters the most, always. I don't know one celebrity that doesn't have a mental health issue, like they're so open about them now. And so it's just like, it shows you can have all the money in the world.
Well, that's great. That's awesome. What are some of the resources? Jeremy was just saying, like, people not talking about it, and that's one of the overall themes. I think we've kind of all connected. Like, people are just not being open about it, and people are hiding it, and people are afraid of the stigma, and people are afraid of being ostracized or treated differently. So, what are the resources if someone thinks that someone they love may have a sign of mental illness that they've heard today, and they say, hey, that sounds like little Johnny, what do we do? Where do we go? What are the resources that are available?
Well, these days, any major city will have community resources. So there's community mental health centers all over your cities. Churches often will provide free counseling. So you could go to a local church and talk to the pastor. Even if you're not a member of that church, they typically will welcome you in. School counselors, there's therapists nationwide. Now there's the national hotline, a suicide prevention hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255.
Okay.
There's also numerous websites and platforms online now for low-cost online therapy. So like BetterHelp is one of them. I think it costs maybe $30 or so a month for, it's like a subscription plan, and they pay like a low level, and they can talk to a therapist either via text, email, or actually on the phone or video. There's several platforms like that. And now that COVID has hit, several therapists are offering services via the internet, like Zoom. If you have health insurance, most health insurance plans will cover mental health. If you have state insurance like Medicaid or Medicare, it is nationwide. They will pay for mental health, and it will not
ask about the cost. Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of people have a problem because they think it's going to cost so much,
Well, it does. If you don't have any kind of insurance, it can.
Okay.
Especially if you're going to somebody that's in private practice like myself. But even myself, I mean, I work with people. I work on a sliding scale fee based off of income. And if it's a community mental health agency, which you can just type in community mental health, and anything that's in your state will pop up for you. They often will, you can do therapy for as low as $20 per session if you don't have insurance, if you're low income, So the resources are there. And I also wanted to say, in regards to like the signs of suicide, a lot of times there are no signs. Mm-hmm. I just read a story from a man yesterday, and his son last week committed suicide, and they had been playing basketball and fishing that same day with that boy. And he was like laughing and interacting with his dad and his grandfather. And then later hung himself in a closet over a video game. Like, he was disappointed in himself over a video game. Now, there is way more to that story, but in that instance, it looks that simple. Like, it looks like there was no sign that this boy would ever possibly do that. And sometimes that is the case. But other signs that you can look for would be if somebody is talking about ending their life, if they're if they're not making plans for their future, if they don't have, like, if you can tell that they're super depressed, and they don't have plans for like tomorrow or next week, or if they start giving away their things, especially if they give away something that is really important to them and you know that it's important to them.
Well, my friend's son gave his car away on social media the day before he killed him.
Yeah.
He asked anybody, he said, I have a free car. All you have to do is come get the keys. And nobody noticed anything, I don't think, but it was, or didn't think it was unusual because he was such a giving person. I don't know, but he did that the next day.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The last thing I want to ask you is, how do people reach you if they want to maybe get more resources, or if they want to talk to you personally? They need to reach you or find out what you're doing right now, because I know you maybe have a website or something where we can.
Yeah, I do. DesireOKC.com.
Okay.
Or evanescencecounseling.com are the websites, and the emails are the same, desireokc@gmail and evanescencecounseling@gmail.com. Well, I welcome anyone to reach out if they have any questions or if they need resources in Oklahoma. I have a big old thick book full of resources around here. So
yeah, well, thank you so much, Charity. I appreciate all your input. That was amazing information, and hopefully that helped somebody out there. Thank you. So with you two, the last questions I want to kind of ask you before we get out of here is, Adrian, I wanted to talk about the relationship aspect of it as well. What do you do? And I don't know if you had this situation or not, but did your partner willingly want to get help, or did she not? Was she struggling with that?
See, it was like I said, it was hard to believe kind of what was the truth and what was kind of her act to get out of work, for one, because it's like, in order to get out of work, she had to get a letter from a therapist or whatnot to sign off on the FMLA. So it was kind of just knowing, what's real and what's not. I didn't know, even as her husband or spouse, I didn't know what was real. I didn't know how to really support her. I did encourage her to, to talk to a therapist, to get the help she needed. But I didn't feel like she was really doing it for that. It was more so just to get out of work.
So what do you do when the person you're with? I mean, even when we saw Kanye West, like she tried to get doctors, and he pretty much refused. What do you do in that situation?
I think, all you can do is just be available, just continue to be supportive for them, but also set your boundaries too, so you can't just, there were times where, she'd go months without working and be like, well, you just pick up the slack, and I'm like, that's not fair to me. So yeah, be supportive, be available, but also set your own boundaries as well.
And Jeremy, what do you think, as far as relationships, how do you feel like you handle the person who maybe, or the young man who maybe doesn't feel like he has a problem or doesn't want to get help?
Yeah, Adrian, said it beautifully. It's set boundaries and communicate. There's nothing more as an individual you can do to help that person. Is just communicate. Even when it's annoying, communicate. It's just, as long as you're present, at the end of the day, you can't say you didn't give your effort. If that person refuses help, hey, I did everything I could to put you in the best position for help. My mom used to tell me, after high school, she goes, hey, I did 18 years to put you in the best position to succeed. You graduated. If you want to go to college, that's on you.
That's
and
on you.
It's
right.
kind of the same thing. It's, man, you don't want to leave it up to people sometimes, but I cannot force a person to go see help or go see a doctor or drink water. It's, you have to pick up
none of that diet.
Yeah, you got to pick up the cup and drink. Like you have to hand in hand, foot in foot. Like, I'm here to give you this much. If you take that, okay, now we can continue walking.
Okay. And the last question I want to ask you guys is, in society now, how can we do better as a society with addressing mental health, so that people feel more comfortable to talk about it and come out and maybe, be open about their own struggles.
The only thing that I truly love with my generation is they take mental health and blow it. I mean, just blow it up into everything, because, our parents were just like, don't say anything outside of the house. Like, this is our business. This is, what we're doing here is no one else's business. When, in reality, I look back, I was like, man, that shouldn't have happened to me. And I see it all the time. Like, my kids will come and be like, hey, this happened and I wasn't okay with it. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about what we can do from there, because it happened. It happened. And now we have to continue to move forward. I mean, social media is a terrible place and it's full of comparison and it's full of judgment, but there are bright sides to it where it's, you will read stories about people who have overcome these things. You will read the bright side of things by reaching out to get help. You can see you have all the resources to find help, even if it's not through your parents, same thing with getting into school. It's, you can find the resources to really get the help you desire and want, with friends in a community, with a counselor. I mean, there's just so much you can find now, and it's wonderful and awful in the same sentence.
What do you think, Adrian? What can we do as a community, as a society?
I think definitely keeping in touch, and I say over the last several years, I've tried to get better at communicating. When I'm thinking about somebody, I reach out to them right then. It doesn't have to be a call, but at least a text. Hey, just thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. I think that's important. Just do it when it's on your mind, because you're going to forget about it. We have 10,000 things going on throughout our day. So just keep in touch. Ask people how they're doing. Ask them about their feelings, how they're feeling. Just like Jeremy said, talk about your feelings. And that's one of the best ways to stay in good mental health, right? Is to kind of talk about how we're feeling and what we're doing to survive, right? So to speak.
Most mental health cases suffer in silence, unless you're Kanye and then you scream to them from the rooftops.
Suffer publicly.
He's a little bit different case. But yeah, I just think that, like you said, going to the neighbor, going to your nephew who you haven't seen in a few days. He's been in his room and his parents may say, that's just who he is. But what's he doing in there? Like, have you checked on him? Have you seen, is he okay? Have you reached out? Have you said, hey, guy, let's go, throw around the football in the yard, or a woman whose niece is kind of going through depression because of a guy and you don't even know about it. I've seen young girls, commit suicide because something was shared on social media that embarrassed them and they were being bullied or treated a certain way and no one knew. And it turned into a depression, which she isolated herself, and then later she killed herself, and then everybody was like, what happened? We don't want to get to that point where we say what happened or where did everybody go wrong. We want to check on people and make sure they're okay as things are going and progressing in their lives. As they're having incidences, we want to be able to handle it right then. I think that's one of the keys in trying to prevent things from escalating to the point where someone considers taking their lives.
Definitely.
Well, thank you guys. I mean, you guys were an awesome blessing to me. Thank you so much for doing this show today. How can we contact you? Let's say somebody, has some youth and maybe they want to reach out to you or see. Do you have a web page? Do you have a social
No, not that
media?
important yet. I have social media. The one I check the most is Instagram or Facebook. They're both just my name, Jeremy Bean. Reach out. I'm willing to answer any questions. It's actually really fun for me to answer questions, so I'm good for it.
I told you on the last show, you got to join the XYZ Connection group. That group, and I'll be in there. You can reach me right in there.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of the show. I had a blast with you all, and thank you all for joining us today on the XYZ Connection. That was another amazing show, and I'm going to give my thoughts shortly because I like to have a little moment of reflection to talk about what we heard and how everything connected together. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you for listening. Let's bridge the gap. Click, comment, share, subscribe. Visit our website on www.thexyzconnection.com. Join our Facebook page at facebook.com/groups/the XYZ Connection. Stay tuned for next week's episode of the XYZ Connection. Critical conversations impacting generations.
I mean, wow, that was an interesting show, guys. I mean, I really enjoyed being a part of that show. I want to thank Adrian of Generation X, Charity of Generation Y, and Jeremy of Generation Z for being with us tonight because their input was so valuable. I mean, who would have known? I wouldn't have known that there was so many aspects of mental health. And I wouldn't have known that there was so many connections also that we had in our views of social media. Because part of the reflections aspect at the end is I like to kind of connect the dots and see where we all met and maybe agreed on certain things. And I did notice that we all said that social media can either really isolate you or really connect you and open up the doors to good conversation. It just all depends on your mindset. And I think that now we have more resources than ever before to get to that place where we can get help for our mental illnesses. So do not be afraid to talk about it. Don't bury it. If you know someone, we all agree, let's get in there and talk to those people. Reach out, talk to a niece, a nephew, see how they're doing. Hug on somebody, love on somebody today, because their lives could depend on it. We already talked about how depression and anxiety are mental illnesses as well. So if you're going through something, please get the help and resources that you need because you are not alone. We're here for you. And also, if you do find our show really interesting, please click like and share it with somebody else. It is called the XYZ Connection because we are connecting the dots and making it where we're able to just talk about those issues. If you think that you would love to be a guest on the show, you can reach out to me also by email at myckelle@empowermentww.com, or our email is the xyzconnection@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out if you have show ideas or you want to be a guest. We also have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/groups/the XYZ Connection. We have some amazing conversations going on there. So you guys go ahead, jump right in and let's connect. Stay tuned as we talk next week about love as a battlefield. That show's going to be amazing because we're going to talk about the differences in love. What if you have different political affiliations or religions, or you have different beliefs and goals? Can you make it work? So stay tuned for that episode too. I'm Myckelle Williams. You guys have a great night. Don't forget to love on one another and keep connecting.